Hello and welcome to another video from English Matters. Today we're looking at As Imperceptibly as Grief by Emily Dickinson. Now interestingly, of course, this poem wouldn't have originally been titled, it would have just been given a number because Emily Dickinson just numbered her poems. This poem, of course, features in the WJEC anthology. I would urge you please now to subscribe and click that bell so you don't miss any future uploads. I want to try and cover all the sort of different anthologies for different exam boards. Anyway, as I said, this poem, it does work better if you have a hard copy and you annotate as we go through it. So, As Imperceptibly as Grief, if we're going to give it that title, it's essentially a very subtle and melancholic elegy. Elegy is like a poem that is something sad, almost like a valediction, saying goodbye to something. But here it serves as an elegy to the passing of summer. Although she talks about this transition from one season to the next as being something that is sad and inevitable, but she also suggests it's hardly noticeable. That's why imperceptibly as grief, imperceptible is used. Imperceptibly here is an adverb, which suggests something that cannot be seen, and imperceptible is something that is almost secretive and hidden in many respects. And because it's secretive and hidden, it feels like perfidy. Now, perfidy, of course, means to be is deceitful, but it's not deceitful at all. But that's interesting in the switch there from the repetition, imperceptibly as an adverb to imperceptible as an adjective. If you think about form, there is a version of this poem that is actually broken up into stanzas, but this one, of course, is obviously using a different variant of the poem. The poem obviously begins describing how summer eventually comes to an end, but it comes to an end in a very gradual, imperceptible way, that word again. And the end of summer is suggested, the conceit is that the end of summer is like the kind of like the ending of grief in some respects. That's it seems to be almost like an extended metaphor that runs throughout the poem. Now, the form of the poem, remember you are judged by form and structure as well as language. The poem's rhythm mirrors the pattern of everyday speech. Its words are simple. It has a simplicity to it. And also, interesting, these dashes that she uses, rather than sort of full stops, these dashes create sort of pauses, but sort of significant pauses, which seems to suggest that she's asking to think about what she said. It certainly enhances the poem's sort of reflective ambience or mood to it. The poem is built up using a lot of natural metaphors, which seems almost very romantic as in a cultural movement, not as in sort of hearts and flowers, in a romantic sense. But these natural metaphors, the seasons are things that sort of turn round and change. She makes it analogous with grief, that's something that fades away. Interesting, in this version of the poem, the single stanza kind of adds to that sense of change being something that is imperceptible and gradual. Because there aren't any stanza breaks that kind of split the ideas up, it's like a merging into one. So if you're talking about structure, that's a good point to make. The fact that there are no stanza breaks suggests that a slow merging into one, like something passing imperceptibly. There's certainly lots of reference to the passing of time as well in this poem, and the changing of the seasons, this diurnal round, as I think Wordsworth would call it. Let's start with the first line, of course, as imperceptibly as grief. I love the simplicity of these lines, of course, it's quite interesting. But it also shows a sense of acceptance in many respects, of something being inevitable. The summer lapses away. You get a repetition of the S sound, summer lapses, almost like a summer breeze in many respects. The summer lapses away. Then we get the second line, of course, the summer lapses away, that lovely repetition of the S. It's almost like a summer breeze. But it's a simile, of course, and it's linked with the first line, as imperceptibly as grief, summer lapses away. Then we get one of those dashes, of course, those sort of long dashes that slows down the overall pace of the poem. And the slowness is almost and because it slows down the pace of the poem, you could say thematically it's linked in, because it's all about a slow transition, isn't it? So that's worth pointing out. Too imperceptible at last. Again, this imperceptible, this adjective reflects the adverb of the first line. It's that repetition. To seem like perfidy. Perfidy is deceit. So there's nothing deceitful about it. It's just kind of a natural process, she seems to be saying. A quietness distilled. I love that line. A quietness distilled. Summer and grief here are associated with stillness, which focuses on a kind of almost a lack of movement, or movement that's so gradual as to be imperceptible. As twilight long begun. As twilight long begun. Interesting half rhyme there between begun and afternoon. What is the effect of that half rhyme? Well, half rhymes are usually used to derail or evoke sort of feelings of unease, certainly structurally in poetry. So you could say the half rhyme here suggests that the poet isn't entirely at ease with this concept, or at ease with the fact that summer is ending. Also, overall, when we think of things ending, like the summer ending, and we've got grief has connotations of death, doesn't it? The summer ending makes us think about the passing of time, which could in a broader sense be a guarded way of talking about the passing of life as well. And twilight, these references to light passing, suggests that movement of time as well. As twilight long begun, or nature spending herself. Lovely use of personification there, isn't it? 1, 2, 3. Or nature spending herself. Wonderful use of personification. Sequestered afternoon. Here summer and grief are kind of associated with stillness, because we get that sequestered afternoon and quietness. We get that link between those two words. And again, you get that half rhyme with begun and afternoon. The dusk drew earlier in. It's interesting how there's almost this personification. Dusk, nature, twilight all have quietness, almost become become proper nouns, don't they? They're given capital letters. Almost suggests that they're more than just elements in many respects. The dusk drew earlier in. Of course, the dusk drawing earlier in is suggesting the end of summer, and how the light is fading. Again, it's kind of a deathly image in many respects. The morning foreign shone. The morning foreign shone has a ringing, chiming quality, doesn't it? That almost like an internal rhyme. It's not an internal rhyme, but it does have a chiming quality. And here I think morning symbolises the end of grief. Daylight is it almost, you can argue, the light bringing an end to darkness, and light bringing an end to grief, as an almost quasi-religious significance to it. As the light, of course, one can leave grieving behind. A courteous yet harrowing grace. It's oxymoronic, isn't it? I mean, grace isn't harrowing. It seems mutually exclusive in many respects. The morning light is a harrowing grace. Suggests that something, but it does suggest that something is unsettling or creates an unease. And that unsettling aspect, although the light has positive connotations, the light also does reflect the passing of time, and possibly the passing of life as well. As guests that would be gone. Lovely simile as well, that the morning is just a guest that just passes through. This suggestion that time is rolling around, our life is rolling around, and we're constantly in a state of, as in life we are in death, as it says, time is passing, our life is passing. As guests that would be gone. Of course, the simile, of course, the morning is like a guest who needs to leave, because you just, time constantly is in motion, it constantly passes. And then we get and thus is like a volta. In other words, a sudden shift in tone. We suddenly move away from the sort of very gradualness of the natural metaphor she uses, and thus, without a wing. It suggests, of course, that the moving away of summer and grief is something that's gradual, without a wing. It's not something that's quick and apparent. Or service of a keel, again, it links into this. It's something that is slow and gradual. It's not something that's it's something that is imperceptible, to lead us back to that adjective. Our summer made her light escape into the beautiful. Beautiful last line, I think. Our. I love this pronoun, the first person plural, our, which includes the reader and suggests that the experience of something coming to an end is ultimately universal, of course. And of course, summer make her light escape. This is also an example of an extended metaphor, which leads us to a full stop, the only full stop in the poem, which brings it to a very decisive end. And I think it reflects the finality of the final ending of grief, or summer and grief having passed. Also, it's interesting, of course, you had to compare it to another poem. To Autumn by Keats would be brilliant to compare this to, because To Autumn also deals with the imagery of the seasons and the passing of time in many respects. And also the season, of course, is personified. Anyway, if you've got anything out of this, please click like and subscribe. Share this with your classmates, of course. But ultimately, please stay tuned for the next video.